Good morning to you. This is Talk Breakfast with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Good to talk to Health Minister Helen Whaley and get onto that trans issue. It's absolutely fascinating. Only in October last year was the policy changed on transgender prisoners, and October the 4th, the Justice Secretary announced plans to reform the policy of allowing those men who self-identify as women once behind bars to be moved to women's prisons. 90% of trans prisoners are in the prison of their sex, but 10% are not. It's largely men, and there is no automatic policy that those men who have been living as women and who are in a women's prison of being moved back into a men's prison. I mean, it's extraordinary. That is the Westminster policy, and only being changed on a very slow basis. Anyway, let's talk about something else right now. Let's talk about Big Brother Watch. That is the organisation that's fighting for civil liberties and our rights not to be, I suppose, spied and surveilled upon. Well, they asked me to get in touch with them quite some months ago to help them with a report they were planning on the Ministry of Truth. And that's the basis of, along with many other people, the basis of a new report they issued. It's come out today, Ministry of Truth, the secret government units spying on your speech. And what happened was, well, during the period of COVID and lockdown, many people were speaking out about some of the policies, whether it was about testing or lockdowns or vaccine passports or any other aspect of policy. People like me, politicians, scientists, other journalists, were speaking out. Well, all the time we were doing that, we were being spied upon and watched closely and analysed, and in some cases behind closed doors and openly smeared by shady government officials, including the 77th Brigade in the Army, looking at what we were doing, flagging up what we were doing, and accusing us of disinformation and misinformation. By the way, it was all paid for by taxpayers. Well, someone else who was subject to this was a Conservative MP, former Brexit Secretary, of course, David Davis. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, I mean, I can understand governments wanting to be wary of some, questionable players in the public discourse, whether it's, Chinese or Russian bots on social media, people who are seeking to undermine democratic debate or elections and the like. We can understand there will be surveillance. But surveillance of a democratically elected MP, scientists like Professor Carl Hennigan of Oxford University, little old journalists like me on talk radio as it was then, talking about policies, questioning policies, we were all being looked at, analysed, monitored by a taxpayer-funded body because not because they thought we were, dodgy Russian spies or the like, but simply because we were critical of government policy. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, the 77th Brigade was set up to keep an eye on foreign attempts to undermine our democracy. That was its purpose. Its purpose wasn't to undermine our democracy itself, which is what it seems to have been at least on one occasion doing. And what's interesting about this is it was done even, I think, early March was some of the earliest references. Now, they were looking at what they termed disinformation, but at that point, they didn't know the answers themselves. I mean, disinformation on vaccines, disinformation on vaccine certification in some cases, disinformation, they say, on lockdown policies. Well, in March of 2020, nobody knew what worked. Nobody had any idea of the transmission mechanisms. All these things have been proven, the government stance has been proven to be wrong subsequently. So what they're doing is trying to, it appears that they're trying to constrain the debate, shut down the debate, by flagging, that's the phrase they use in some of the documents, flagging up things said by you, by me, by other MPs, by Peter Hitchens. And it is very interesting to read Peter Hitchens' article in the Mail on Sunday yesterday, because he tells a story of how he went and did an interview with a website, which normally gets very, very large numbers of viewers. And for some strange reason, it didn't. And one has to wonder, did they influence the search routines?
Yeah.
Did they flag this up?
And how were they able to do it without being in cahoots with social media companies? And we've seen, certainly with Twitter, that once Elon Musk bought Twitter, that they've exposed the Twitter files, the amount of collusion that was going on between governments and the senior executives at Twitter to shut down a lot of debate. And this is the thing, this was legitimate debate. This wasn't disinformation, misinformation, this is from aliens and people talking nonsense. answers. These were considered interviews with experts. I'm not saying I got everything right at all. I'll tell you what, I got a darn sight more right than a lot of people on Sage and Independent Sage who were routinely on TV and radio. And as you say, this unit was set up very early on in the pandemic when they didn't have a lot of answers. In fact, a lot of the things that we were saying from that period onwards turned out to be far more correct, and a lot of those lessons having been learnt rather late. But the sinister thing about this is, an army unit doing this, government taxpayers' money being spent on this, monitoring people. Yes, anyone could have looked at these texts or tweets. Anyone could have looked at what was on YouTube or interviews that I was doing or any of the speeches you were giving on these different issues. But it was the attempt to smear us, wasn't it? I mean, I was having flagged up as disinformation, even jokes, like a jokey tweet. I did about the one tweet about the absurdity of the government's red, amber and green system for the travel, and I put out a sort of a Dulux colour card to say, I've got a sneak preview, and it's all it's made much more simple. Clearly a joke, mocking the system. Well, last time I looked, being able to mock stupid government policies was a very important right in a democracy. The government, the fact that the government hasn't even admitted this, hasn't apologised for this, and this unit is now a permanent unit, it's not a temporary unit, that is, I think the right word to use is that sinister, isn't it?
Yes, it is. What's interesting, of course, is it's all in secret too. And if you look at the earliest references, it's even before there was any authorisation. I assume that government can only do things with parliamentary authorisation at the end of the day, under one law or another. And the only law I can imagine would allow them to do this would be the coronavirus emergency law, which came into effect, it came into effect late March 2020, after they did this. So it's secret, it appears to be unauthorised, they don't admit to it, along with a whole load of other things that went on at the time, all of the polling and the other elements that happened, they still won't release any of that. So it is not the job, it is categorically not the job of a government to secretly try to control the debate. I'm afraid that is the harsh fact. In a democracy, that's improper.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing here is what Big Brother Watch have uncovered. Very assiduously and actually very courageously, I think. What they've uncovered is something the government categorically should not be doing. It is the opposite of what a democratic government should do. After all, if the Russians intervened in this way, we would be causing a huge fuss. It would be front page.
I know also, and wouldn't the likes of, The Guardian and the BBC be causing a huge fuss about that? Because they were all over that when it was about Brexit. But apparently a bunch of people like us, we're just a bunch of, quacks and misfits and cranks. So it's okay. And that's the thing. But we were smeared. I was called an anti-vaxxer. I get more criticism online now because I said, no, I think people should take the vaccine up, above a certain age. And I'm vaxxed myself. But I worry, again, it's not just about what has happened. It's not all in the past because what happened is continuing, but also how else this is being used. Because we see the suppression of debate on COVID. As a result of that suppression of debate, people had their civil liberties stolen away from them without any good cause. Not there are very many good causes for doing that. People will have died as a result. No doubt at all because of that. The damage to our economy because there wasn't a proper debate. But we've also got other issues that are ongoing, like net zero policy on climate change. The trans debate, the censorship on that. When you get people like Nicola Sturgeon and many in government, you just label everyone a bigot who raises any concerns and you censor them and stop them using the correct pronouns for people of male bodies and the like. You don't have a proper debate. There are really big issues that affect people's lives and livelihoods that are being monitored by government, censored by government, and censored in collusion by the social media companies, which is now our public forum, our public space for debate. That is going to have a massive long-term impact on public discourse and on our democracy, isn't it?
Yeah, even without the government's intervention, we've moved into an era in which what I used to think of as conventional debate when I was a little younger has almost vanished, where in some subjects, you've named some of them. The trans debate's the most recent one, the woke debate's the most recent one, where we're dealing in a series of echo chambers. Yeah. And the echo chambers don't talk to each other. Now, this is a massive, of itself, this is happening innately. is an undermining of democracy. And what we're seeing with the Big Brother Watch expose is government making it worse. Government actually creating an echo chamber of what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. I mean, I think they titled the report Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
It's a reference to Orwell, in which any wild idea, if it's got the imprimatur of government, is the truth, and anything else is illegal. Now, they haven't done that quite yet, but the fact that this is being done secretly, being done with no oversight whatsoever, is frankly scary. I mean, it's the beginning of a long, slippery slope. I mean, fortunately, we have institutions like Big Brother Watch around to keep an eye on this, but we have to act on it. We have to say to the ministers, what the hell do you think you're doing? Who on earth authorised this? What was the purpose? And how on earth did you define your truth that everybody else was referencing?
Exactly. Just finally, this is a government, your government, bringing in an online safety bill, giving massive penalties, including prison, to bosses of our social media companies if they don't crack down on things which the government and the social media companies think of as harmful. Well, given that they thought people raising questions about vaccine passports was harmful, frankly, I'm terrified. I'm genuinely terrified of what they're going to do to free speech in this country.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, we managed to remove from that bill the general legal but harmful clause. But, there were suggestions at one point that there'll be a strict penalty for, quotes, misinformation. And who the hell was going to define misinformation? It was going to be a government minister, rubber-stamped by a committee appointed entirely by whips. This is the sort of thing we rightly criticise Russia, Iran, and Venezuela for doing, and yet we do it ourselves secretly. I mean, it's really, really beyond the pale.
There are a lot more questions to must be asked. We've got to be still talking about this until we get answers. Frankly, I want someone sacked. Simple as that. Forget people's tax affairs. I want someone sacked over this, please. David Davis, always a pleasure to talk to you. Freedom campaigner there, former Brexit Secretary David Davis. 9:34 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast.